and we're constantly we're constantly moving ahead. There's something else I read before this. It says change is painful, but nothing is as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. I'll read that again. Change is painful, but nothing is as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. So once again, thank you. And thank you again to James for organizing this. Thank you to all our speakers for the 2-day program. It is going to be a 2-day program today from 7 till 9. And then tomorrow, Saturday, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. We're going to be respectful of your time. I'm geared up, I'm pumped up, ready to learn. And so the format for today is we're going to have a speaker who is going to start us off once I finish the introduction. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A session, which I think is really important. So if you have any questions, please send me your questions privately. I'm the facilitator here today, Neka Odunaike. So please send me any questions you have, and then I can relay that to our first speaker. And after his session and Q&A, I'll hand over to James just for a quick interlude to talk about a new project that is burning on his heart. And then after that, I'll pass on to our next speaker, and then we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll end, on that note. So please grab a drink, anything, be relaxed. It promises to be a fantastic session. So our first speaker would be Bala Enebi. Apologies if I don't pronounce your name correctly. And Bala is a strategy and business development professional with over 20 years experience in the corporate sector. And he has a passion, which I think is fantastic, to lift people out of poverty, of material need, and giving them an opportunity and hope. He's also a co-founder, because it's easy to say, I have all this experience, but actually this is what it is. He's a co-founder, a trustee of Heart of Christ, a faith-based charity that supports the homeless and orphans in the UK and Africa. This is really important because I listened to the news recently, and it was reported that about 36,000 people have become homeless in the UK during this period of the pandemic. So homelessness is a key thing also in the UK. And so Bala also runs, a faith-based charity that supports the homeless and orphans in Africa and the UK. And he's also a certified Maxwell speaker, trainer, and coach. So we're privileged to have you on board, Bala. And we're here, we're ready to go. And we will have some questions for you at the end of the session. And I believe Pastor James, sorry, I call him Pastor because he is my pastor. So I'll slip into that from time to time. James will be here as backup if we need to add in any more flavor to the questions being asked. So over to you, Bala.
Thank you very much, Eneka, for the generous introduction. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can. Okay. Loud and clear. Yes.
Brilliant. So it's a pleasure to be on this call tonight, and I'll just start by expressing my appreciation to James for the invitation. I'm looking forward and I'm very excited regarding what I would be sharing today. It's a very interesting topic that has transformed personally my attitude to personal growth, and I trust it would add value to everyone on the call tonight and hopefully help you on your personal growth journey. So with that, I will just try to share my presentation. Delay. Can you all see my presentation now?
Yes.
I'll be speaking on the topic of intentionality. It is a topic, as I said, that has transformed my attitude to personal growth and really my expectation tonight is it would add value to you and hopefully change your attitude as well to personal growth. So what is intentionality? Intentionality simply means being deliberate in your actions. It is doing things, it is doing something on purpose. If you want to grow, you have to grow on purpose. And that's the premise of what we'll be talking about tonight, right? We all need to grow in 5 key areas to discover our purpose and to reach our potential, right? To discover our purpose and motivation in life, we need to grow in self-awareness. To become better human beings with good values, we need to grow in character. To be successful in our careers, we need to grow in professional and leadership skills, right? To actually enrich our soul and attain emotional balance in our lives, we need to grow spiritually. And to develop healthy relationships, we need to grow in relational skills. We must all take responsibility to grow our, we must all take responsibility and ownership, I must say, not just responsibility and ownership for our personal development in all of these areas, these 5 key areas I've put on the screen. Because these areas actually impact our personal lives, they impact our career, and they impact our spiritual well-being. And that's why it's important that we take an interest in our growth in this area. And as John Maxwell puts it, in order to reach your potential in any one of these areas, you must be intentional about your personal growth. It is the surest way to develop yourself and become a more effective and a more fulfilled version of yourself. Now, the specifics of growth could be different for each one of us, but the principles are absolutely the same. They are universal for everyone. They are universal. And as we go through this presentation, what I would ask you to do is just self-check yourself on this question. What are you doing to intentionally grow yourself in these areas? And if you're not doing anything, what could be holding you back, right? Now, this is a quote I love from James Allen's As a Man Thinketh. He says, most people are anxious to improve their circumstances, but are unwilling to improve themselves. They therefore remain bound. And this is so true. Most people are eager to improve their situation, resolve their problems, but are unwilling to take the growth steps necessary to improve themselves and change the results that they're getting. And hence, they actually remain stuck with the problems that they're facing. And that's what, and this is nothing, if nothing underlies the importance of personal growth to you, actually, I think this point makes the case very strong, right? And here's the situation. There's no doubt that every one of us actually have more potential than we're currently manifesting in our lives. Hence the gap between where we are and our potential. As a matter of fact, I learned this recently, that the average person operates at 12% of their potential. You know, most of us would like to believe that we're better than average. So let's assume you're better than average. You're probably operating at 20 to 25% of your potential. That still leaves a massive gap between where you're at and your potential. Potential is a word that implies possibilities. When we fulfill our potential, odds are we also achieve our goals and we reach our aspirations. But here's what's interesting about it. Whilst the word potential is used in a positive sense to denote the possibilities you can aspire to attain, the phrase unfulfilled potential is negative Indeed, it is as negative as the word potential is positive. Why is that? Because it implies a failure to attain the possibilities that you're rightfully entitled to aspire to. And that failure is down to the fact that you did not grow to develop the capabilities that are within you to attain that potential. It could be the difference between living a fulfilled life and an unfulfilled life. Indeed, as Oliver Wendell puts it, many people die with the music still in them. Too often it is because they're always getting ready to leave. Before they know it, time runs out on them. The question then is, can you see the gap between where you're at right now and where you want to be? That is the place of your aspiration to the right. Do you know what it will take to bridge that gap from where you are to your potential? If you're like me, you might come up with some reasons, or you might come up with a list like this: money, connections, education, talent, a new job, just work harder at your job, good luck, or a good break, maybe a wife or husband, you know, who knows? I mean, people have all sorts of lists that they might come up with, but it might surprise you to know that the gap between where you're at right now and reaching your potential is actually a growth gap. And because growth is not an automatic process, you must be intentional about bridging your growth gap. Those that are intentional about their growth are more likely to reach their potential and achieve their goals. People don't improve by accident. You don't improve by simply living. You have to be intentional about it. Working hard at your job does not guarantee growth, and hoping it will isn't a strategy, right? In his book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth, John Maxwell actually makes a profound observation. If you focus on goals, you may hit goals, but that doesn't guarantee growth. However, if you focus on growth, you will grow and always hit your goals. This underlies the importance of personal growth. But here lies the challenge. We know we need to grow, but there are often misconceptions, mistaken beliefs, hindrances, whatever you call them, that keep us from taking the intentional steps we need to take to grow and reach our potential. These are what John describes as growth gap traps that hold us back from being as intentional as we should be about our growth. The reason this is so important is because the greatest gap most of us wrestle with is the gap between knowing and doing. You know you need to grow, but you are hindered because of these traps. The question is, what are these traps and how can we overcome them? The rest of my talk today will actually focus on 8 common growth gap traps that hold most people back from intentional growth. And then we will conclude with some helpful steps on how to deal with these traps and begin our growth journey. My expectation is that once you become familiar with these growth gap traps and identify which of these traps that we talk about is the biggest obstacle to your intentional growth journey, you will be empowered after tonight to deal with those traps and become intentional about growing yourself. So let's look at the first trap. The first misconception or trap that hold most people back from pursuing intentional growth is what John Maxwell describes as the assumption gap. I assume I will automatically grow. We expect growth to mimic the natural cycle of human development, right? We grow automatically from children into teenagers and to adults. And with each stage of that growth, we grow in size, We grow in strength, we grow in our capability to do more challenging things, and we grow in our mental capacity as well. It is therefore unsurprising that we unconsciously slip into the trap of then assuming that as adults now, we will continue to grow automatically in our mental capacity, in our professional skills, in our spiritual well-being, in our leadership skills. Hence, we fail to become intentional about our growth. This has been one of this specific trap has been for me a big challenge in some of the 5 areas that we just looked at. I assumed that completing my formal education armed me with all that I needed to fulfill my potential. That proved a massive misconception on my part. And I sincerely wished that I had discovered the information that I'm sharing with you tonight soon after my formal education. It would have helped me lips. The reality is that we don't improve by simply going through the motions of our daily survival. We have to be intentional about it. Once you are done with your formal education, you must take the ownership and the responsibility for your growth process, because personal growth will not happen on its own. Do not assume it will. The second misconception or trap that hold most of us back from pursuing intentional growth is the knowledge gap. I don't know how to grow. A lot of us don't grow because we don't know how. The reason is simple. We're used to following a curriculum all through our formal education. Now that you've completed your formal education, how do you keep growing without a curriculum? Chances are, if I were to ask on this call now, how many of us actually have a plan, a growth plan? Not many of us will respond that we do, and that's okay, because it requires intentional reflection to know how to grow. It takes an awareness of your motivations, your personal goals, your strengths, your weaknesses, where you are currently, and what it will take to get you to where you want to be. These things cannot be discovered by accident. It takes intentional reflection. This is another major obstacle I've had to deal with personally. I was waiting on my employer to provide the training for my development or to provide the program for my growth. Most of us, if we're honest, are actually guilty of waiting on our employers to provide a program for our development. You are effectively mortgaging your growth and your future to your employer. Even where you are fortunate, I mean, some of us are, even where you're fortunate, if you're amongst the few that are fortunate to have an employer that invests in your development, it would most likely be designed to grow you in what they want you to do for the company, not necessarily what you need to fulfill your potential. You therefore must be willing to bet on yourself and invest in your own growth and take responsibility for the application of whatever you learn in the process. The alternative is to rely on random learning and patchy growth, mostly coming from difficult experiences. It is far, far better to plan your growth intentionally and follow through with discipline at a pace that you define for yourself. That brings us to the third misconception or trap that most people face. That is a timing gap. It is not the right time to grow, or it is not the right time for me to begin. John Maxwell shares a riddle that perfectly illustrates this point, and I put it on screen. 5 frogs are sitting on a log. 4 decide to actually jump off the log. How many are left? And he shares that his instinctive response was to say 1. His dad corrected him, no, there's 5 left. How can that be? 4 have decided to jump off. The reason is there is a difference between deciding and doing. If most people actually act on their intentions, the world will be full of great inventions today. The fact is, most people don't act on their intentions and therefore find themselves subject to the law of diminishing intent, which simply says that the longer you wait to do something you know you should do now, the greater the odds that you would never do it. There are lucky occasions when the issue of timing is taken off your hands, such as when you're pushed to seek growth because you are under pressure, for instance, to grow into a new position of responsibility. But these are rare situations. It is far better to be intentional and to plan your growth before the pressure of responsibility prompts you to do so. If you're in the habit of always waiting for pressure of responsibility to push you into growth, you may reach some goals, but you would eventually plateau as responsibilities dry out. As the opportunities, for instance, dry out. But once you start growing intentionally, you keep growing. You keep asking yourself, what's next? What's next? What's next? You're not growing because you're under pressure. You're growing because it becomes a lifestyle. And that brings us to the fourth misconception or trap, which is the mistakes gap. I'm afraid of making mistakes. Most of us have goals, but the fear of making mistakes or failure is a major obstacle to embarking on the growth journey that is required to reach those goals. This is partly because it requires an admission that you don't have the answers. The process involves a level of vulnerability on your part, and there are missteps involved. It scares most people. It could make you look foolish. It could make others think less of you because after all, you've given the impression that you have all the answers, right? You project the impression to others that you have all things, you've got it all together. But actually embarking on self-development then actually makes you vulnerable. It reveals to people that you don't have the answers. You still have a lot to learn, and most people don't want to do that. Mistakes is an indication that you're growing. If you're not making mistakes, it means you're not stretching. You're not trying anything new, and consequently, you're not growing. According to Professor Warren Bennett, a mistake is simply another way of doing things. It also means that you're human like everybody else. You must be familiar with the story of Thomas Edison. It's one that never ceases to intrigue me. I mean, Thomas Edison, it said, made 1,000 unsuccessful attempts at inventing the light bulb before he eventually broke through. And he didn't consider those attempts a mistake. He simply saw them as discovering 1,000 ways of how not to do it. And that's the way we must treat our mistakes. To do anything worthwhile, you are actually open to the risk of mistakes. And the mistakes might be investment. You see a training program you might want to invest in, and you're thinking, oh, would this training program actually deliver what I want out of it? Or I might lose my money. So what? Give it a go. You might not lose your money. You might learn something. And if you end up losing your money, at least you know how not to do it next time, right? So, I mean, these mistakes should not keep you from doing these things. And it holds a lot of people back. And that brings us to the next point, which is the perfection trap. And this ties nicely to the mistakes trap, right? I have to find the perfect way of doing it before I start. Now, where the mistake gap says, I can't move out of the fear of making mistakes. The perfection gap says, I will not move until I find the perfect plan. Many of us are wired for perfection. I know I am. I actually struggle with it. The plan has to be perfect before I move. And that's something that I'm constantly trying to deal with. And the challenge is there is an illusion of security in perfection. It tells you, it gives you the impression that you're unlikely to fail if the plan is perfect. We therefore are inclined to keep searching for the best way before we start something. But you have to start to find the best way. That is the truth. The best plans for growing happen as we begin to grow. The value compounds and the journey becomes progressively clearer. It is like driving a car, and this is an interesting analogy. It's like driving on an unfamiliar road at night. Ideally, you would like to be able to see the whole route before you set out, but that's impossible. You see the road progressively as you move forward, a little more at a time. As you inch forward, you see a little more of the road. So it is with growth. Once you get started any way you can. Just get started. Once you get started, it becomes progressively clearer. You discover the next steps and the next steps and the next steps. You don't have to find the perfect way before you start. That brings us to the next growth gap trap, which is the inspiration gap. Now, this is the sixth one. I don't feel like doing it. This is an interesting one because it's one I wrestle with all the time. This gap has to do with motivation, inspiration gap. This has to do with motivation. You simply don't feel the motivation to do what you know you need to do. Of all the gaps I've talked about, this is the one gap that requires a simple decision of will. Will I do it or will I not? Right? John describes motivation as a trap because feelings are unreliable. Your feelings don't always lead you to take the right action, but taking the right action will lead to the right feelings. In other words, let your right action dictate your feelings and not the other way around. This is where the phrase popularly coined by Nike actually comes into play. Just do it. Just do it. That has become a popular phrase for me. Just do it, right? I mean, it's simple. It might be, I mean, you might see this as a reverse logic, but right action will always give you the return of right emotion, right? John, and this is simple. And the reason is you don't actually have, you cannot feel your way into a right action, but you can act your way into a right feeling. And John describes it this way, the difference between whiners and winners. And he says whiners want to feel good before they do something, winners do something and then feel good. The right emotion will always follow the right action. And this is something I deal with constantly. And for me personally, it could be different things for you. And I'll just give you an example for me. For instance, I have to wake up early to do my daily meditation. And because I don't get to go to bed as early as I should, it becomes a struggle to wake up early to do my meditation. And I struggle with it. I don't feel like it. The alarm goes off and I don't feel like getting up. And most times, I mean, there are a lot of times that I succumb to my feelings and I just sleep on. But you know, when I actually wrestle against my feelings and I get up and I go and do my devotion, I feel so much better afterwards. I mean, I'm just energized for the rest of the day. I feel so positive about the day. I mean, my feelings just follow the action that I've taken. And the times where I have not actually, the times where I've followed my feelings and not woken up to do it, I wake up eventually and I feel so depressed and so low about myself for not doing it. And it could be something different for you. It could be going out to exercise, all right? You don't feel like going out to exercise. It's too difficult and you just follow your feelings and stay. But if you break through your feelings and go out and do it anyway, You feel so much better afterwards. You're energized, you feel strengthened, you feel refreshed, and you feel so proud of yourself for having done it. So that tells you your feelings would always follow your right actions. Because at the end of the day, it is not your feelings that would make the difference. It is your actions that would make the difference on your life. So follow your actions. Let your feelings follow your actions and not the other way around. Don't try and feel yourself into doing the right thing. Always act yourself into feeling the right way. I stayed on this point because this is a big, big trap for me. And I believe, and I just guess it is a challenge to most people as well. Now that takes us to the seventh trap. I hope we're doing well on time. I'll just try and speed up, which says this is a comparison gap, right? It simply says others are better than I am. Now, this is a trap that is so easy to fall into, especially when you've taken the decision to begin your intentional growth journey. The decision is likely to expose you to others that are much better or much farther ahead of their growth journey than you are. The temptation is for you to begin to compare yourselves to them. And you begin to feel discouraged because they do the things that you're aiming to do so much better than you think you would ever be able to do, right? And sometimes it actually makes you feel uncomfortable to put yourself in development environments because those environments are filled with people who you feel are better than yourself. And then they make you feel inferior. And so you don't want to put yourself in those environments. But you need to recognize that that is the perfect environment for your growth. The environment where others are better than you. What you see in those that are ahead of you is a reflection of the potential that is within you. And you are on the right path to growing yourself, to growing into your own potential. Remember this if you don't remember anything I say on this comparison gap trap. Nothing you say will teach you anything new. You learn something new from what others say. So if you find yourself in an environment where you have to speak less and listen more, rejoice, for you are in the perfect environment to learn something new. And here are two truths to encourage you. One, there is always someone better. Two, rejoice for those that are better, for you will learn from them. And if these two truths don't encourage you, maybe this would encourage you. Someone might be looking up to you as better. You need to show them the way. That's the more reason why you must keep growing yourself, because you need to show others the way as well that are looking up to you. That takes us to the final gap, which is the expectation gap. I thought it would be easier than this. We expect the journey to be easy, but the truth is, it always turns out to be more challenging and much longer than we expected. And that's because, and that's really the nature of breaking new ground. It is uncomfortable. It will stretch you out of your comfort zone most of the time. That's precisely why most people will not even contemplate it, because they don't want to be stretched out of their comfort zone. What people might refer to as luck or sudden success is often the result of prolonged periods of intentional growth and consistent action on your part. People don't see it. It's things that you do behind the scenes. And that's why I love this. I mean, a book I read recently, Atomic Habits by James Clear. He explained perfectly how exponential growth actually works. He said, if you get 1% better each day for 1 year, by the end of the year, you will end up 37 times better than you were when you started. Now, just think about it. This is a difficult concept for us to appreciate in our daily lives. We often dismiss small changes because they don't seem to matter very much in the moment. The key is to stay consistent, and the benefits will compound and eventually erupt into this breakthrough moment that everyone can see. And James Clear describes that moment as the plateau of latent potential. That is when all the little gains have been stored up and stored up and stored up over a sustained period and eventually just bubble up and erupts into what everyone can see. So if you stick with your growth plan, it would eventually erupt into what everyone can see. And what's interesting about this, something you need to remember about this, is that it also works on negative habits. So if you're in the habit of doing negative things, you don't see the results straight away. It actually gets stored up. It gets stored up and eventually erupts into this plateau of latent potential. So you might be eating the wrong things, eating here and there, and you don't see any change. Oh, I'm looking well, but you don't see it. It actually gets stored up, all these little habits, and then it explodes. And you just see yourself one day, oh, I don't like what I see. And that's the plateau of latent potential. This happens on positive and on negative habits. So just be consistent. Hopefully you can break the consistency in your negative habits and stay consistent in your positive habits. And you would see that erupt into this plateau of latent potential I just talked about, right? And this is what I call the lucky paradigm, right? Growth, your personal growth, plus your attitude, plus the opportunities before you and the actions you take to capture those opportunities. These are what people refer to as luck. These are the things that dictate the results that you get in your life. And people sometimes attribute this to luck, but it's all these four things coming together. Now that we've come to the end of all of the traps, I will just do a quick recap of the 8 growth gap traps that I talked about. Ask yourself, which of these traps has presented to you the greatest challenge in your intentional growth journey? Is it the assumption trap, the assumption gap, the knowledge gap, the timing gap, the mistakes gaps, the perfection gap, inspiration, comparison, expectation gap? You first need to identify the traps that are holding you back, then begin to take steps to deal with that gap and begin your intentional growth journey. Now making the transition to intentional growth. I trust this is the bit most of you have been waiting for. Yeah, I've talked about all the things that hold you back from growth. How do you break out of it and get on your intentional growth journey? Here's a framework. It's just a framework that you can follow to kickstart your transition to intentional growth. The first one is to reflect by asking yourself where you want to go, what direction you want to take, what path you want to take. How do you need to grow? Ask yourself all of these questions, reflect. The second thing you need to do is to map out some actions you can take right now to start your intentional growth journey. Saying you would do it later might sound harmless to you, but it's an obstacle that can derail your ability to execute. It is the stuff that kills dreams because later never arrives. Later always pushes things forward and forward. So you need to map out some actions you can begin to take now. The third thing you need to do is look at the hindrances that might keep you from taking the actions, the steps that you've just mapped out. Think about what those hindrances could be. It could be the fear of overextending your finances. It could be the fear of putting your job at risk. It could be lack of time. For instance, you might decide that one of the things you want to do is begin to read one book every month in the area that you want to develop yourself in. But the challenge could be the long hours that you work. That could be a hindrance. How do you deal with that hindrance? Could you listen to an audiobook instead of reading a physical book? Could you do that whilst you're driving to work? Could you do it during your lunch breaks? Could you read in the morning? Could you wake up earlier? Just think about ways you can deal with that hindrance. There's always a solution. And this brings us to the final point there, which is change, which is the theme of this event. You have to commit yourself to change. Change from accidental to intentional growth. It is easy to fall into the rut of just thinking that life would bring growth as you just keep living, but that doesn't happen. You must actually decide consciously that you want to change, that you want to change from accidental growth to intentional growth. You have to settle that in your mind, that you want to do that. And just to help you do that, take a look at some of these points that outline the differences between accidental growth and intentional growth. You might recognize yourself in the left quadrant or in the right quadrant. Are you someone that always plans to start something later? Do you insist on doing things right now? Are you someone that waits for growth to happen to you by accident? Do you actually intentionally take responsibility for your growth? Do you only learn from your mistakes? Yeah, some learnings we'll do from our mistakes. But do you actively, proactively take steps to learn before you make mistakes? So just look at this. There might be things you can add to the list to actually just self-check yourself to see if you're depending on accidental growth or you're intentionally growing yourself. You could add a lot more to this list. Do you talk big or do you follow through? You know, these are things you should self-check yourself. I'll just leave you with this as a final thing to help you execute on your plan. We've talked about how you can transition from accidental to intentional growth. But once you've decided that you want to do it and you actually have mapped out a plan, as I outlined in my previous slide, how do you then begin to execute that plan? These are three quick steps that I would recommend for you to take. The first one is to focus on systems rather than goals. And this might surprise some of you because we're actually being taught to map out our goals, to keep our goals before us, even frame your goals and just keep looking at your goals every day, and that would motivate you, right? But just hear this. You must focus on developing a system to deal with the hindrances that hold you back. And that system is what will guide you on your growth journey. You do not rise to the level of your goal, but you fall to the level of your system. And if you don't believe me, just take this analogy. You have a Premier League that takes place in the UK. You have 16 teams that compete in this, or 18, as the case may be. All 18 teams have a goal. Their goal is to win every game and to win the league at the end of the season. That is their goal. But the team that eventually wins the league is the team that has a good system. And that system is a system of nutrition for their players, a system of training consistently every day, a system of personal discipline for the players. They have to have a system. They can't just keep their eyes on the goal of winning. So you must develop a system and focus on that system. That's what will deliver the outcome that you want. That's number one. Number two, you must schedule time for personal growth into your calendar daily. Your goal should be to have an appointment with yourself for personal growth at least 5 days a week. You should have worked out a strategy to deal with any hindrances by this time that would make it difficult for you to schedule this, right? Deal with any problems. Most of us actually underestimate the unimportance of so many things in our lives. We elevate everything to the same level of importance, but there's so many things you can knock off your calendar to make way for personal growth time for yourself every day. Look at your calendar, be ruthless about it. Take things out, make time for personal growth. Not everything is important. And then finally, remove friction. Remove friction. Now, friction are things that hold you back from executing on your plan. And again, in his book, Atomic Habits, James Clear actually speaks about this. He gives some excellent tips about building healthy habits. Removing friction is an efficient way of reducing the barriers to execution. And what does that mean? It means making the things you want to do obvious. It means making it easy. It means making it attractive. It means making it rewarding. What does that mean? Making it obvious. If you've committed yourself to reading a book, don't put the book in your closet. Keep it on your bedside table where you, before you go to bed, you see the book. When you wake up, you see it. If you spend most of your day in the kitchen, keep it there in the kitchen. As you stay in the kitchen, you see the book. If you spend your time in the study, let the book be on your table so it's obvious to you. That removes the friction of looking for the book. It is there in your face, making it easy. Make the process easy. You don't have to take a shower before you do what you want to do. Just make it easy, make it rewarding, make it exciting. What does that mean? You might be someone who loves watching TV. That's something that takes the time of most people. Maybe you watch The Crown on TV. You might say to yourself, if I read a chapter of this book, then I watch an episode of The Crown. That way you make it exciting. You make development exciting for yourself, and you make it rewarding, because you know as soon as I finish reading this chapter, I'm going to enjoy myself watching an episode of The Crown. By the time you've watched 10 episodes of The Crown, you've read 10 chapters of the book, and the book is done, right? That is an exciting way of doing it. You've removed the friction of doing this. And finally, I'll just leave you with this quote. If Rome wasn't built in a day, how long are you willing to give yourself? That is a quote by James Maxwell. If you keep learning and growing yourself every day over the course of many years, you will be astounded at how far it will take you. And in keeping with the theme of this event, which is change, I will leave you with this final comment by John. We grow and we change when one of two things happen. Number one, when we hurt enough that we want to change. Number two, or I'll just say or rather than number two, or when we know enough that we can change. I will repeat. One, when we hurt enough that we want to change, or when we know enough that we can change. I sincerely hope that you know enough that you want to change. Thank you for listening, and God bless you all. Thank you. Over to you, Nneka.